Thousands of protesters took to the intersection in Minneapolis where George Floyd was killed by a police officer who decided that it was a good idea to kneel on his neck for over 5 minutes. George Floyd later died as a result of not being able to breathe. That viral video was incredibly difficult to watch, and it led to people not only asking for, demanding, I should say, for the cops involved to get fired, but more importantly, for the main cop, Derek Chauvin, to basically face criminal charges for what he did. Now, unfortunately, some of the scenes related to the protests did look violent, but that was because the police response to the protesters was pretty brutal and aggressive. So I want to show you 2 quick videos to give you a sense of what it looked like visually, and then I'll break it down and give you what people were saying on the ground. Take a look. So police used rubber bullets, tear gas. There were reports of some protesters allegedly damaging property. But I always find it so fascinating how whenever there are protests in response to an unarmed Black person getting killed by cops, like it always seems like there's this aggressive approach, right? But I mean, we've seen how many stay-at-home protesters confront the cops, you know, aggressively. They get in their face, they yell at them, they shout at them. I'll show you a video example of that in just a second. And you don't see examples of cops using tear gas or rubber bullets or any accusations that these protesters went too far. And I'm not talking about commenters online. I'm talking about police officials themselves. You never hear them, you know, or read them releasing statements saying that, oh, well, you know, this violent behavior was unacceptable. It was disrespectful. They blocked entrances to hospitals during a pandemic. None of that commentary following these anti-stay-at-home protests.
I mean, it's entirely possible that, you know, those police aren't necessarily just seeing the behavior differently, but they're seeing themselves in certain protesters, but not in others. I mean, there are cops who are going to be doing their job in the face of some of these stay-at-home protests, but they might very well agree with what the protesters are saying. They might not necessarily think that they're wrong to arm themselves and to storm, state capitals and try to put pressure on the governor and legislators, you know, with the implied threat of political violence to change their policies. They might think, well, you know, that's what an American looks like. Getting mad at the cops for killing someone, that's mean to me. But these people, they're just frustrated with the governor. That doesn't have anything to do with me.
Yeah, well, the one of the city council members from Minneapolis, his name is Jeremiah Ellison, tweeted some details about what he experienced at the scene during these protests. He says, "This is a disgusting display. I'm here on the south side helping people as I can with milk, water, and towels. So far, I have been unable to prevent the police from firing indiscriminately into the crowd. Moments ago, I held a towel to a teenage girl's head as blood poured from it." And there were some other examples shared. Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar also talked about the brutality towards some of these demonstrators. And look, I'm not saying this as, you know, a way of pretending as if there wasn't maybe a few protesters who did something that was wrong, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe there were reports of someone using graffiti or why am I forgetting?
Not graffiti.
I know, exactly. But like, look, that's my point. So, oh, there was graffiti, so let's go ahead and use these incredibly aggressive tactics. I think that there could be other ways to de-escalate the situation rather than just indiscriminately firing rubber bullets into a crowd of protesters, many of whom I'm sure were not causing property damage based on what I've seen in multiple videos. John, let me just show you one more video of what it looked like during these protests. Yeah, it looks like a war scene.
Yeah, and look, I feel this knee-jerk need as a progressive to try to put myself in the position of virtually anyone, no matter how much I might disagree with them fundamentally. From the point of view of a cop, this is probably really frustrating. All these people, they're throwing stuff. There might be graffiti. It's really bad. Okay, well then, as John Iadarola, I would say, one way you can avoid some of these really inconvenient situations is to stop killing people. Seems like a really simple solution that would both pacify them in terms of the protests, but also give them no reason to feel like they need to continually go out in the streets because the same exact sort of police killing keeps happening.
And I want to just compare the scene that you just saw. Okay, these are the protests in response to what happened to George Floyd. Compare that to some of these anti-stay-at-home protesters and the way that they would talk to cops, shout at cops, aggressively handle cops. Here's one example of that. I mean, it's just incredible. And I want to be clear that I want cops to handle every situation like that. I don't want the stay-at-home protesters to be met with violence. I don't want anyone to be met with violence. There's a way to show restraint and still manage the crowd so things don't get out of control.
Look, obviously, constitutional right, everybody gets to protest. You don't just get to protest if I think that the thing you're protesting about isn't stupid, but think about the like what's on the line in these different situations. Like this was a spontaneous protest in response to yet another killing of this sort, that the vast majority of the people doing the protesting have probably lived with experiences like that just constantly throughout their lives. And they have watched as nothing has been done in response to it. No wide-scale policy or structural changes, obviously, but in the vast majority of cases, even where video like the video in this case comes out, almost no individual consequences. And I know some people will respond, well, they already fired the cops, right? Okay, yeah, cops do sometimes get fired. What, are they not going to be hired by another police department in like 2 weeks in the next town over? Is that not going to happen? That we know that
does
happens.
Happen all the time.
And so that's what's on the line on the one hand, and these people are obviously furious about that. And then on the other hand, you have these nationally coordinated, billionaire-funded grassroots protests against the reopenings where people are pissed off that salons are closed down for a few more weeks, or someone at Trader Joe's asked them to put on a mask. They're allowed to protest about those things too. But think about the stakes that they have. They arm themselves to the teeth. Everyone takes out every piece of like hardware and machine, like all that stuff that they have. Imagine if the people who were pissed off about a murder that they had to watch repeatedly on video had all been toting semi-automatic weapons to that protest. Think about how the reaction would have been in that case.
So this happened again during protests in Huntington Beach, California. And a man by the name of Christian Francis Peterson of Costa Mesa, California, has been jailed on suspicion of exhibiting a deadly weapon other than a firearm and kidnapping. Peterson approached a KTTV cameraman and reporter, produced a pocket knife, and then forced these journalists into a news van to delete any footage in which he may have appeared. The journalists had been covering a Huntington Beach protest against the state's shelter-in-place order issued to try to curb the spread of coronavirus, the Los Angeles Times reported. So it got a little bit of attention locally for obvious reasons. But while these protesters in Minneapolis are being smeared like incessantly right now for being outraged over what happened to George Floyd, have they covered, some of the just straight up violence and criminal acts that are taking place at some of these protests, these right-wing protests? I mean, This is a guy who used a knife to literally kidnap journalists and hold them hostage until they did what he wanted them to do. I'm glad he's facing criminal charges. But if we're going to talk about violence during protests, I would argue that this is a huge issue that deserved a little more attention.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is I had not even heard about that. It's not that far away. I had not heard about that story. That's insane. That person definitely belongs in prison.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.